The final bell was a death sentence. Jamal felt it in his bones, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. All day, he'd felt their eyes. The sidelong glances from students in letterman jackets, the whispered calculations from the boys who ruled this concrete jungle with smug entitlement. He'd kept his head down, a fortress of silence, hoping his invisibility cloak would hold, but it was thinning. He'd felt it snap during lunch. A shoulder check that was too hard to be accidental, sending his books skidding across the waxed floor. A chorus of laughter, sharp and brittle. And him, their ringleader, Chase. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Watch it, new kid," he'd said, the words dripping with a faux apology that was more insulting than the shove itself. Jamal had just knelt, gathered his things, and walked away. He'd seen the disappointment in their eyes. They wanted a reaction. They wanted a show. Now, as students flooded the corridors toward freedom, Jamal knew the performance was about to begin. He moved with purpose, a shark feeling the waters change. He could sense them falling into step behind him. The confident, lazy gait. The scent of cheap cologne and arrogance. He didn't need to turn around. His body, trained to read the subtlest shifts in energy, was screaming a warning. They were herding him, away from the main exit, toward the side door by the old bleachers. A quiet place. A place where things could happen without witnesses. Jamal's breath evened out. His heart, which had been hammering against his ribs, slowed to a steady, ominous drumbeat. This was the calm before. The last few seconds of a world that was about to be shattered forever. Northwood was a picture of suburban perfection, a town that proudly displayed its all-American label like a badge of honor. Manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and a high school that looked more like a small college campus. But for Jamal Jones, it felt like a beautifully painted cage. Every friendly smile from a teacher felt laced with cautious assessment. Every curious glance from a student carried the unasked question, "What are you doing here?" He and his mother had moved from the vibrant, noisy heart of the city, trading their cramped apartment for a small, quiet house on the edge of Northwood. It was his mother's dream, a safer neighborhood, a better school, a chance for her son to escape the cycle that had claimed his father. She'd worked double shifts for a year to make the deposit, her eyes always holding a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Jamal would never tell her the truth. He would never describe the isolating whiteness of the halls, the way his dark skin made him a walking exclamation mark in a sea of muted tones. His first class, history, set the tone. The lesson was on the Civil War, and when the teacher said, "And of course, the issue of slavery was the primary cause," Jamal felt every head in the room subtly turn toward him. He wasn't a student, he was a representative, a living exhibit. He kept his eyes fixed on the textbook, on the sanitized paragraphs that reduced centuries of brutality to a complex economic issue. The cafeteria was a social map of unspoken rules he didn't understand. He found an empty table at the back, a solitary island in a roaring sea of socializing. That's when they first approached. Chase Anderson, the undisputed king of Northwood High. Star quarterback, student council president, his future a straight, gleaming line to Ivy League privilege. He moved with the unearned confidence of someone who had never been told no. "New blood," Chase said, his voice a friendly drawl that didn't reach his eyes. His friends, a trio of clones in identical polo shirts, fanned out behind him. "Where'd you transfer from?" "The projects?" It was said with a chuckle, a joke everyone was supposed to be in on. Jamal simply looked at him, saying nothing. His silence was a language they didn't speak. It unnerved them. "Tough guy, huh?" One of the clones, Matt, sneered. "Think you're too good to talk." It was then that Jamal made his second mistake of the day. He went back to eating his apple. The dismissal, the sheer lack of engagement, was an insult they couldn't tolerate. Their hierarchy was built on fear and respect, and Jamal was offering neither. Chase's smile tightened. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for Jamal. "Listen here. You're in my house now. You don't get to sit where you want, look how you want, or ignore who you want. You'll learn your place." The shove in the hallway minutes later was simply the physical punctuation to that sentence. And as Jamal walked toward that side door, he understood. His place, in their world, was beneath them. They wanted to teach him that lesson firsthand. They had no idea he was already a master of a far darker curriculum. The days bled into a week, then two, each one layering a new kind of humiliation onto the last. The initial confrontation by the bleachers had been averted by the sudden appearance of a janitor, but it only served to heighten the tension. It was a temporary stay of execution, and Chase and his friends seemed intent on making Jamal pay for the delay. It was never overt. It was the subtle, insidious brand of racism that Northwood specialized in, the kind that could be dismissed as a joke or boys being boys if ever called out. It was in the way a teacher would ask him, and only him, to confirm he had the prerequisite for advanced English, the unspoken assumption that he must be behind. It was the security guard who would subtly trail him in the library while ignoring the white students whispering loudly in the corner. The bullying was a refined art. A stolen homework assignment accidentally dropped in a puddle. The constant, low-frequency hum of muttered slurs as he passed, thug, gangbanger, words that painted a violent fantasy around his quiet, studious presence. They would accidentally bump his chair hard enough to make his pen skid across a test. In gym class, during basketball, he was elbowed, tripped, and fouled with a violence the coach seemed mysteriously blind to. "Play through it, Jones. Be a man," the coach would bark, his eyes sliding past the culprits. Jamal took it all. He absorbed their hatred like a black hole, giving back nothing. No anger, no fear, no reaction. This, more than anything, seemed to infuriate Chase. The Prince of Northwood was being defied by a mere peasant, and his court was watching. The injustice was a physical weight on Jamal's shoulders. He'd lie awake at night, his body thrumming with a suppressed energy, his mind replaying the taunts. His mother would ask how school was, and he'd force a smile. "It's good, Ma. Everyone's real nice." Protecting her dream was more important than confessing his nightmare. The breaking point approached with the subtlety of a tidal wave. It was Friday, and the school was buzzing with talk of the big playoff game that night. School spirit was a fever, and Jamal was the virus they wanted to purge. In the crowded hallway between periods, Chase stumbled into him, sending Jamal's backpack flying, its contents scattering under 100 trampling feet. "Oops," Chase said, not even looking as he kept walking. His friends laughed, but this time, something was different. As Jamal knelt to gather his battered notebooks and broken pencils, his fingers brushed against a small, worn photograph that had fallen from a hidden pocket. It was a picture of his father, a man he barely remembered, a man who had tried to fight his way out of a bad situation and had lost everything. His father's eyes, so like his own, stared back at him from the past, filled with a love and a sorrow that was a physical ache in Jamal's chest. He looked up. Chase was 20 feet away, laughing, slapping his friend on the back, a golden boy untouched by consequence. And in that moment, Jamal's carefully constructed wall of silence developed a hairline crack. He didn't say a word. He just looked. He let the mask slip for just a second, and the raw, unfiltered intensity in his gaze, a lifetime of pain, loss, and disciplined fury, shot across the hallway like a laser. Matt, one of the clones, saw it. He flinched, actually took a half-step back, and tugged on Chase's arm. "Chase, man, forget it. Let's just go." Chase followed Matt's gaze and saw Jamal still on his knees, the photo clutched in his hand, his eyes holding a storm. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Chase's face, quickly replaced by arrogant rage. "How dare this nobody look at him like that? You got a problem." Chase yelled across the hall, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "You want to do something about it?" The crack in Jamal's wall sealed shut. The storm retreated behind a veil of calm. He slowly stood up, shoved the photo deep into his jeans, shouldered his empty backpack, and turned away without a word, but the message had been sent and received. The challenge was issued. The confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when. The entire school felt it. The pressure cooker was whistling, and the lid was about to blow. The universe has a way of orchestrating its final acts. That night, under the blinding, artificial sun of the Northwood High football stadium, the stage was set. The air was thick with popcorn grease, cheap perfume, and the tribal roar of the crowd. Jamal had come only because his mother, beaming with pride at their new life, had insisted. Go make friends, baby. Be part of the community. He stood alone at the top of the bleachers, a shadow in the riot of home team blue and gold. Below, on the field, Chase was the hero, throwing a perfect touchdown pass. The adulation washed over him. He was untouchable. The game ended in a thunderous victory. The crowd spilled onto the field, a chaotic, joyful mess. Jamal turned to leave, wanting nothing more than the silence of his room. That's when he saw them. Chase, Matt, and the others, breaking away from the celebrating crowd, their eyes locked on him. They were hyped on victory and adrenaline, looking for one last conquest to cap their perfect night. They cornered him in the nearly empty parking lot, under the flickering light of a lone lamppost that hummed like a nervous witness. The sounds of the celebrating crowd were distant now, a world away. Thought you could just sneak away? Chase slurred. He'd been drinking. We're not done with you. I don't want any trouble, Jamal said, his voice low and even. It was the first time he'd ever spoken to them directly. The sound of his voice seemed to excite them. Too bad, Matt sneered, stepping closer. Trouble found you. He shoved Jamal hard in the chest. It was a mistake. The final mistake, the shove didn't move Jamal. He didn't stagger back. He simply absorbed the impact, his feet rooted to the asphalt. His head, which had been bowed, slowly lifted. The placid, neutral expression was gone. In its place was something utterly terrifying. It was a look of profound, ancient calm, the eerie stillness at the eye of a hurricane. Chase sensed the shift but was too arrogant, too drunk on his own power to back down. You think you're tough? I own this town. I own you. He threw a wild, telegraph punch aimed at Jamal's face. What happened next wasn't a brawl. It was a dissection, time seemed to slow. Jamal's body, which had looked lanky and unassuming, became a weapon of pure efficiency. He didn't block the punch, he moved inside it, his left arm deflecting Chase's wrist in a motion so fluid it was almost gentle. His right hand didn't form a fist. It became a spear, fingers tight, knuckles forward, that shot forward and impacted with surgical precision just below Chase's sternum. There was a sound like a tire losing air. All the color drained from Chase's face. His eyes bulged, not in pain, but in sheer, utter shock at the complete failure of his body to draw breath. He crumpled to his knees, gagging silently. The world froze for a second. Matt and the other two stared, their brains refusing to process what they had just seen. Their leader, their invincible hero, was on the ground from a single, seemingly effortless touch. Then, animal instinct took over. With a roar of confused rage, all three charged at once. What followed was a brutal, silent ballet. Jamal was a phantom. He used their momentum against them. A step to the side, a hooked ankle, and one boy was catapulted face-first into the side of a parked car with a sickening thud. He grabbed the second swinging arm, used his own force to spin him around, and applied a precise, crippling pressure to his shoulder joint. The boy screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony, and dropped like a stone. The last one, Matt, stood frozen, his courage evaporating. He saw it now. The economy of movement, the utter lack of anger, the chilling precision. This wasn't a street fight. This was a language of violence they couldn't speak, and Jamal was fluent. Jamal took a single step toward him. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't speak. He just looked at Matt, and in that look was the entirety of every slur, every shove, every moment of humiliation he'd endured. It was a judgment. And Matt couldn't bear it. He stumbled backward, tripped over his own feet, and scrambled away crab-like on the asphalt, his whimpering the only sound besides the hum of the lamp. Jamal stood amidst the wreckage of their arrogance. 4 boys. One kneeling, gasping for air he couldn't find. One moaning against a car, clutching a bloody nose. One sobbing, cradling a dislocated shoulder. And one crawling away in abject terror. He walked over to Chase, who was still on his knees, tears of frustration and agony streaming down his face as he fought for breath. Jamal knelt down, bringing his face level with Chase's. He didn't touch him. He just spoke, his voice a low, calm whisper that carried more menace than any scream. "You wanted to know what I was," Jamal said, each word falling like a stone. "My father was a fighter. He taught me to never start a fight. But he also taught me how to finish one. You own nothing. This town? This school? Me? You are a small, scared boy in a small, scared town. Remember this feeling. This is the feeling of your own weakness." He stood up. The storm had passed. He turned his back on them and walked away, leaving not just 4 broken bodies in a parking lot, but the shattered illusion of their entire world. The following Monday was shrouded in a surreal silence. Whispers of the parking lot incident had spread through Northwood High like a virus, mutating with each telling. The official story, the one the school administration and the town clung to, was of a tragic post-game altercation between students. There were suspensions, even for Jamal, a token punishment for being involved. But the truth, the raw, unvarnished truth of what had happened, was etched into the pale, nervous faces of Chase and his crew. They walked the halls like ghosts, their swagger replaced by a nervous, darting vigilance. They never looked at Jamal again. Not directly. Their eyes would slide away, finding sudden immense interest in the floor or the lockers whenever he passed. The system, however, was not done with him. The principal, a man with a weary face and a politician's smile, called Jamal into his office. He spoke of zero-tolerance policies and finding a path forward. But his eyes held a new, cautious fear. He wasn't dealing with a simple scholarship kid from the city anymore. He was dealing with an unpredictable variable. Teachers now treated him with a hands-off caution, a blend of fear and resentment. The narrative was quietly shifting. The poor, bullied new kid was now being recast as the aggressor, the dangerous element they had, sadly, always suspected him to be. It was a masterclass in systemic preservation. The town's golden boys could not be villains, therefore, the outsider had to be recast as one, but a different shift was happening among the student body. The other outsiders, the nerds, the band kids, the ones who wore thrift store clothes and got called names, they looked at Jamal differently. They didn't see a thug. They saw someone who had stared into the face of the machine that oppressed them all and hadn't blinked. They didn't befriend him, that would have been social suicide. But in the hallway, a girl he'd never met, who was constantly mocked for her weight, caught his eye and gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod of respect. A boy who was bullied for being gay quickly looked down at his shoes, but not before Jamal saw a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. Jamal understood then that his victory was not in the violence. The violence had only been the key that unlocked the door. The real victory was in the shattering of a myth. He had shown them that the king had no clothes. That their power was a fragile thing, dependent on the compliance of those they oppressed. He had not become a hero, he had become a mirror, and Northwood was finally getting a glimpse of its own reflection, and it was terrified of what it saw. He found himself standing by his father's grave that weekend. It was a simple marker in a crowded city cemetery, a world away from the manicured lawns of Northwood. He hadn't visited in years. They wanted a monster. "Pop," he whispered to the cold stone. "So I showed them one. And now they'll never see anything else." But as the wind rustled the leaves of an old oak tree, a profound clarity settled over him. His father had fought with his fists his whole life, and where had it gotten him? A cold grave and a son who had to learn the same brutal language just to survive. Jamal had used that language, and it had bought him a fearful peace, but it had also built a higher wall around him. The real fight wasn't in the parking lot. The real fight was every day before that, when he chose silence. It was every day after this, when he would have to choose what to do with the space his violence had carved out. Would he become the monster they feared, ruling through terror? Or would he become something else? Something they couldn't understand at all. He thought of his mother's hope. He thought of the quiet nod from the girl in the hall. He had proven he could break their bodies. But the system that created them, that protected them, that was already rewriting the story to protect itself, that was a much harder enemy to hit. It couldn't be dislocated with a precise motion. It had to be dismantled, piece by piece, with a different kind of strength. He stood at his father's grave not as a fighter, but as a son standing at a crossroads between two legacies. One of rage, one of hope. The brutal skills his father had taught him had saved him, but they would also forever isolate him if that was all he ever used. He walked out of the cemetery as the sun began to set. The world hadn't changed. Northwood was still Northwood. But Jamal had. He had learned the cost of power and the price of peace. He had learned that sometimes, to show a monster you are not afraid, you have to show them a monster of your own. But the true test of strength is knowing when to put the monster away. He had won the battle in a blaze of brutal efficiency. But the war for his own soul was just beginning. The question is no longer what they turned him into that night in the parking lot. The question is, what will he decide to become tomorrow? And the real question, the one that hangs in the air long after the story is over, is this: in a world that's so quick to force you into a fight, what is the true cost of winning? And what does it really mean to be strong?